I want to begin with a heartbreaking update to a story we've been following all morning. We've just learned a pregnant mother was shot and killed in her DeKalb County apartment overnight.
8 bullets shattered a dark bedroom window, stealing a 9-month pregnant mother in her sleep beside her 2 terrified toddlers. Days after celebrating her baby shower, Shakiya and her unborn son were brutally executed. This was targeted, calculated, insider betrayal. We refuse to let Shakiya's story fade into a cold statistic. Subscribe now to demand justice and never miss an investigation. Join this big family and let's grow together. Now let's dive into the story to truly understand what was stolen on that quiet Tuesday morning. You have to look past the flashing blue police lights and the yellow crime scene tape. You have to look back just 48 hours prior, to a room filled with the sounds of crinkling wrapping paper, continuous laughter, and a family celebrating new life. Shakiya Pridgen was only 23 years old, but she was a young woman who had already built a beautiful baseline for her life. She was a mother of 2, a sweet 1-year-old boy and an energetic 3-year-old girl. She had recently achieved a massive milestone for a young parent, moving into her very first apartment all by herself at the woods at Pepper Tree Complex in DeKalb County, Georgia. Her father described her with the kind of simplicity that only a proud parent can muster. She was a loving, sweet, caring person with a profoundly good heart. She went to church, she worked hard, and she poured every ounce of her energy into being the ultimate provider for her Barbies. The weekend before the nightmare unfolded, the atmosphere surrounding Shakiya was entirely unburdened by fear. Her family had gathered to throw her a virtual baby shower for her 3rd child, a baby boy. In the surviving video footage from that Sunday, the joy in the room is palpable. You see a family unit that is fiercely tight-knit. Grandmothers, aunts, uncles, and cousins are crowded into the space, eating food, playing games, and counting down the days. Shakiya was 9 months pregnant, just a week away from her scheduled delivery date. They weren't preparing for a tragedy, they were actively preparing for an arrival. The centerpiece of that beautiful Sunday afternoon was a namming game. Shakiya had written down 4 potential names for her unborn son, placing them into a small bucket. She decided to let the family have a collective hand in choosing the identity of the new life about to enter their world. With drumrolls pounding on the tables and cameras rolling, 2 names were pulled from the bucket. The winning choice was a name full of strength and future promise, Kairen. In those video frames, Shakiya is radiant. She is smiling, surrounded by her children, completely enveloped in the safety of her family's love. The gifts she unwrapped that day, the onesies, the packs of diapers, the soft baby blankets, were carried back to her new apartment. The crib was already assembled. The decorations from the shower were likely still fresh, the tape holding them to the walls not even dry yet. But true crime narratives are uniquely cruel because the viewer is always burdened with a devastating piece of dramatic irony. We know the monster is already waiting in the dark. Every laugh in that room was being timed by a hidden clock. What makes this story so profoundly heartbreaking is the sheer proximity of her safety net. Her mother, Verdena Scott, didn't just live in the same city. She lived in the exact same apartment complex, just steps away in a neighboring building. The family was a fortress around this young woman. She was not isolated. She was not a vulnerable target wandering dangerous streets late at night. She was a mother doing exactly what mothers are supposed to do, resting her heavily pregnant body in her own bed, automotive still, inside the walls of her home, with her children tucked safely against her chest. When the clock ticked past 5:00 a.m. on Tuesday morning, the peak of joy from Sunday was entirely crushed by an unimaginable reality. As Shakiya slept deeply, with her 1-year-old and 3-year-old sharing her mattress, someone walked quietly through the grass of the complex. They bypassed the front door, avoided making a sound that would alert her or the neighbors, and walked directly up to her bedroom window. They didn't just fire a warning shot. They didn't bang on the glass. They raised a handgun and systematically unleashed 8 deliberate rounds through the windowpane. The glass shattered, and the bullets tore directly into the dark room, striking Shakiya multiple times in her stomach and chest while she lay completely defenseless. Just a few buildings away, the sharp, echoing cracks of gunfire pierced the morning silence. Verdena Scott woke up to the sound. Instinctively, with the raw intuition that only a mother possesses, she knew something was desperately wrong. She didn't wait. She ran out into the pre-dawn darkness, chasing the sound of the violence, completely unaware that she was running directly into the worst moment of her life. When Verdena crossed the threshold into her daughter's bedroom, the scene was one of pure, unfiltered devastation. The room smelled of gunpowder and copper. The 2 toddlers were awake, physically uninjured by some terrifying stroke of luck, but covered in the immediate aftermath of the assault. Shakiya was unresponsive in the bed, bleeding heavily. Her mother immediately dropped to her knees, desperately pumping her chest to perform CPR. When I went to go pick her up, I heard her gurgle. Verdner later recalled to local reporters, her voice trembling but resolute. I heard her last breath. I just prayed that they could resuscitate her. But there would be no resuscitation. Medics rushed Shakiya to a nearby hospital, but the damage was absolute. Shakiya Pridgen was pronounced dead, and alongside her little Kairen, the baby boy whose name had been drawn amidst cheers and laughter just 2 days earlier, never got to take his first breath outside his mother's body. A vibrant, 23-year-old life, an innocent unborn child, and the complete peace of a young family were utterly annihilated in a matter of seconds. The gifts from the baby shower were still sitting in the living room, waiting for a baby who would never come home, while a grandmother stood in the ruins of her family, staring at the shattered glass of her daughter's bedroom window. A vibrant, 23-year-old life, an innocent unborn child, and the complete peace of a young family were utterly annihilated in a matter of seconds. The gifts from the baby shower were still sitting in the living room, waiting for a baby who would never come home, while a grandmother stood in the ruins of her family, staring at the shattered glass of her daughter's bedroom window. But as the smoke cleared, detectives realized something terrifying. The killer didn't break down the door. They didn't stumble into the wrong room. They knew exactly where Shakiya was sleeping. How did the killer know the precise layout of her home? Subscribe now to jump directly as we uncover the precision behind this premeditated ambush. The initial flashing blues of the DeKalb County police cruisers did nothing to warm the cold, pre-dawn air outside the woods at Pepper Tree Apartments. As the sun slowly began to crest over Decatur, Georgia, it illuminated a crime scene that left veteran first responders entirely unsettled. On that particular night, dispatch logs showed that multiple shootings had broken out across the sprawling county, a brutal, chaotic stretch of street violence. But as lead detectives stepped under the yellow tape and approached the shattered ground floor window of Shakiya Pridgen's apartment, they realized something immediately. This was not a stray bullet. This was not a random crossfire. This was an execution. Detectives turned their flashlights toward the exterior brick wall, tracing the trajectory of the gunfire. The physical geometry of the crime scene began to tell a story of terrifying calculation. There were no signs of forced entry at the front door, no broken locks, no signs of a struggle or a confrontation inside the living room. Whoever did this didn't want to face Shakiya. They didn't want to risk her fighting back, and they didn't want to give her a single second to scream. Instead, they bypassed the entryway entirely and walked through the dark grass straight to a specific window at the side of the building. The shooter stood outside in the pitch black, raised a handgun, and unleashed 8 deliberate rounds through the glass. Every single bullet was aimed with a singular, lethal intent. The bed, think about what that requires. To fire a weapon through a dark windowpin at 5:15 in the morning and hit a sleeping target multiple times, you cannot be guessing. You cannot be operating on a hunch. You have to know the exact internal blueprint of that apartment. You have to know which room belongs to the target. And more than anything, you have to know exactly where that bed is positioned against the wall. You don't get that kind of terrifying precision by accident. You only get it from someone who has been inside, someone close, someone who knew her routine, her space, and her life. As detectives mapped out the room, they uncovered a detail that made the air in the bedroom turn to ice. Positioned on that very mattress, directly beside Shakiya's body, were her 1-year-old son and her 3-year-old daughter. The bullets had sliced through the air just inches above their sleeping heads. By some absolute miracle, the toddlers were physically untouched. But they were awake, crying, and trapped in a room thick with the smell of gunpowder. The calculation of the shooter was laid bare. They knew those Barbies were in that bed, and they pulled the trigger anyway. While forensics teams bagged shattered glass and counted shell casings, the lead investigators began canvas operations, looking for witnesses. But they didn't have to look far for answers. The neighborhood wasn't offering vague descriptions of a shadowy figure fleeing into the night. Instead, Shakiya's family was already standing outside the perimeter, their faces mask-like with a mixture of profound grief and boiling fury. Shakiya's mother, Verdner Scott, stood before the detectives, her voice steady despite the trauma of just having watched her firstborn child take her last breath. She didn't ask the detectives to go look for a random phantom in the streets. She didn't ask them to check the alleyways for a botched robbery. She looked the lead investigator dead in the eye and gave them a name. When a major crime breaks, the gears of a homicide unit usually grind slowly. Detectives typically spend days, if not weeks, building a profile, interviewing acquaintances, and waiting on ballistics tests just to find a direction. But in the early morning hours of that Tuesday, the detectives didn't need to search for a motive. The family handed it to them on a silver platter. They pointed directly toward a specific individual, a man who possessed the exact insider knowledge required to pull off the hit. The unborn baby's father, the baby daddy. The family revealed that this wasn't an isolated flash of anger. This was a premeditated ambush. The suspect knew Shakiya was vulnerable. He knew she was 9 months pregnant, physically exhausted, and due to deliver his own son, Kairen, in just a matter of days. He knew she had just moved into her first apartment, trying to establish a safe, independent life for her children. And according to the family, he chose the absolute peak of her joy, just 48 hours after her baby shower, to eliminate her from the world. Armed with a specific identity, the focus of the DeKalb County Homicide Unit shifted instantly. This was no longer a whodunit investigation. It was a high-stakes manhunt. Detectives began pulling phone records, pinging cell towers, and dispatching units to known addresses associated with the suspect. They needed to move fast. A man capable of firing 8 rounds into a bed containing his own unborn child and 2 helpless toddlers was an unpredictable danger to the public. But as the hours ticked by, the investigation hit a wall of official silence. Local news crews from Fox 5 Atlanta arrived on the scene, cameras rolling as reporters pressed the police public information officer for updates. The response from the department was tightly guarded, wrapped in the cold, cautious language of an active investigation. They confirmed the double homicide of a 23-year-old woman and her unborn child. They confirmed that shots were fired from the outside in. But when asked about a suspect, the police refused to give a name. No public warrants were announced. No photos were blasted across the evening news. To the public watching at home, it appeared as though the case was at a standstill, hanging in a dangerous limbo, but behind the scenes detectives were uncovering a digital trail. They were tracking a timeline, putting together the hours leading up to 5:15 a.m. They knew the suspect had vanished the moment the shots were fired. He had turned off his phone, cut ties with his usual circles, and melted into the sprawling landscape of Atlanta. Days turned into an agonizing waiting game for the Pridgen family. Every morning they woke up to the reality that Shakiya and Kairen were gone, while the man responsible was still breathing free air, running from the consequences of his actions. The official silence from law enforcement grew louder, heavier, and more frustrating by the hour, but detectives were quietly closing the net. They had tracked a vehicle. They had a final cell phone ping. They knew exactly what area he was hiding in, and tactical units were moving into position to make the arrest. The family waited by the phone, praying for the call that justice was finally coming. Then the phone rang, but the voice on the other end didn't bring the news of an arrest. Instead, the detective dropped a bombshell that changed the entire trajectory of the case, a sudden twist that no one in the room saw coming. The voice on the other end didn't bring the news of an arrest. Instead, the detective dropped a bombshell that changed the entire trajectory of the case, a sudden twist that no one in the room saw coming. Who was really pulling the trigger from the shadows? Hit subscribe right now to unlock and see exactly how the manhunt ends. The bombshell dropped by detectives did not signal that the trail had gone cold. Instead, it revealed the deep, terrifying anatomy of an ongoing crisis. The man investigators officially named as the primary suspect was 26-year-old Devin Anthony. When detectives pulled his records, they uncovered a dark past that fundamentally changed the nature of the manhunt. Anthony was a convicted felon who had been booked into the Fulton County Jail on charges including felony murder, aggravated assault, and weapon possession. A dangerous, hardened individual was out in the wind, and he had targeted the very woman he once claimed to love. For the Pridgen family, the revelation of Devin Anthony's identity transformed their grief into a secondary wave of pure betrayal. Shakiya's father, Pridgen, recounted how Anthony had completely deceived them all, performing a flawless charade to convince the family he was the perfect, supportive boyfriend. He had watched Shakiya build her new home, celebrated her independence, and then used that intimate proximity to map out her assassination. As the U.S. Marshals Service joined forces with the DeKalb County Sheriff's Office to track Anthony down, the narrative of Shakiya's death collided with a staggering, systemic reality. True crime stories often treat these instances as isolated flashes of individual madness, but the statistical data tells a far more sinister truth. For young women in America, pregnancy is supposed to be a protected milestone, surrounded by community support and medical care. But medically and socially, it is a period of heightened danger. Academic and law enforcement research has proven time and time again that homicide is a leading cause of death for pregnant women in the United States. frequently outranking medical complications or illness. In the vast majority of these cases, the perpetrator is not an intruder or a random predator. It is an intimate partner. Pregnancy often acts as a volatile catalyst for abusive men. It represents a shift in control, a moment where a woman's focus pivots toward her children, and a time when many victims attempt to gain independence by moving away, exactly as Shakiya had done by securing her own apartment at the woods at Pepper Tree. When a controller loses control, the violence often turns lethal. But for Shakiya's family, this horrific cycle hit even closer to home. Cruelly, this was not the first grave they had stood over that year. Just months earlier, the family had buried Shakiya's cousin, Serenity Tate, another vibrant young woman whose life was stolen in a brutal act of domestic violence. Two cousins taken by two men who had once looked them in the eye and promised protection. Knowing that domestic violence suspects are at their most dangerous when cornered, the U.S. Marshals swarmed a location in Riverdale, Georgia. On June 16, 2026, the manhunt ended. Tactical teams closed the net on Devin Anthony, taking him into custody without bond on multiple counts of malice murder. With the suspect behind bars, the narrative shifted from a frantic manhunt to a desperate fight for the future. True crime cases often end when the handcuffs click into place, but for the survivors, that is merely where the real sentence begins. Shakiya's mother, Verdna Scott, refused to let her daughter's name dissolve into the standard, quiet passing of a local news cycle. Standing before the media, she weaponized her grief, converting her pain into public strategy. "This will not be the last time you hear from us," she promised the cameras. She understood that attention spans are short, that society grows numb to statistics, and that the only way to ensure absolute accountability is to keep the pressure burning hot. The focus of that pressure now turns to the living legacy left in the ruins of that bedroom apartment. Shakiya's 1-year-old boy and 3-year-old daughter are safe in the arms of their grandparents, but they are growing up in a world completely altered. The 3-year-old carries fractured, terrifying sensory memories of that morning, the sudden deafening cracks of gunfire, the shattering glass, the immediate absence of her mother's protection. The 1-year-old will have no living memories at all, relying solely on photos, baby shower footage, and the stories passed down by a tight-knit family. They will grow up knowing that their mother was a devoted, church-going provider who poured everything she had into their future. And they will grow up knowing that their community fought to ensure her name, and the name of their unborn brother Kairen, would never be forgotten. Devin Anthony faces a courtroom, but the ultimate victory belongs to a family that refused to stay silent in the dark.